UFC Mexico City is officially over. Brandon Royval defeated Brandon Moreno in a very close split decision win, a very controversial win in some eyes, and Brian Ortega submitted Yair Rodriguez in the third round in a head-arm triangle, a very nice submission. We're going to go over these two fights. We're going to discuss the UFC Mexico City card, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions on how I thought the fights went, what happened, all that good stuff. But before we get into it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now let's get into it. UFC Mexico City is officially over, and I've been seeing a ton of people talk about how bad this card was and that the main event didn't live up to the hype and the co-main event wasn't that good, and I highly disagree with all of these statements. I think UFC Mexico City was actually a pretty good card, I thought, in general. Although the main event wasn't that exciting, I still thought it was a great fight. It was a very technical fight between Brandon Royval and Brandon Moreno. I thought the co-main event was very exciting. Yair Rodriguez in the first 3 minutes in the first round was gun blazing, almost put out Brian Ortega. And then in the second, third round, Brian Ortega turned it around, ate a lot of shots, and found the submission against Yair Rodriguez. And the fight of the night, Daniel Zellhuber fighting Francisco Prado. I thought that fight was amazing. It was a banger of a fight, especially in the Coco main event spot. Lightweight fight. It was a great fight. In all, I think this was a good card. I definitely think in the main event, if we go in and talk about the main event, I thought Brandon Moreno, he looked different. I didn't think he looked the same. I was kind of surprised on how slow Brandon Moreno started and how long it took for him to really start implementing kicks into the fight. In the first 2 rounds, I gave it to Brandon Moreno. He was kind of just waiting for Brandon Royval to blitz in, and you see Brandon Moreno just circling the cage a lot. And then going into the third round, the head coach for Brandon Moreno told Brandon Moreno, after you throw that overhand right, throw the left kick, and you started seeing more of the kicking game for Brandon Moreno. But in the first 2 rounds, Brandon Royval, he landed some good shots but didn't really do much, and it was really Brandon Moreno blitzing in, throwing in the overhand rights and the left hooks that kind of won him those first 2 rounds. Going into that third round and then fourth and fifth round, Brandon Royval just had way more volume. He was putting out way more strikes than Brandon Moreno. Although I felt like the damage wasn't significant, it was still obvious that his output was a little bit more than Brandon Moreno, and I think that's what the judges saw to give it to Brandon Royval over Brandon Moreno. I thought Brandon Moreno, he just looked off. He did not look the same. He didn't look like this fiery flyweight guy that we saw in the Pantoja fight or in the Figueiredo contest or even in the Kayakar France contest. It just seemed like Brandon Moreno was like a half step behind and couldn't really get anything going. He kept this a technical striking affair, like a point fight almost. He didn't really blitz in a lot. He didn't put in a lot of combinations together. And it wasn't until about the third, fourth round until Brandon Moreno started putting combinations together. The problem with Brandon Royval was that he was putting good combinations together. He just wasn't getting out in time. So Brandon Royval would, land some good combinations, and then he would stay in too long, and then Brandon Moreno would, hit Brandon Royval without Brandon Royval exiting correctly. I thought the main event was good. I would like to see Brandon Royval fight Pantoja again, although it might not be the most interesting or intriguing fight right now. I think that's what we have to do. That's what it's really set up for. Or we do Brandon Royval and Amir Albazi and just let Pantoja wait. I think either of those options are available. For Brandon Moreno, I kind of want to see him take some time off and try and figure out what happened this past weekend, because it just felt like he was a little off. I don't know if that was his game plan, not to put out a lot of strikes or maybe a lot of movement, but it just seemed like he was off. So I'd like to see Brandon Moreno take some time off and then maybe come back and then fight someone like an Alex Perez or even a Muhammad Bakayev or any one of those upcoming flyweight fights, and have Brandon Moreno take some time off. In the co-main event, Brian Ortega surprised everyone. He almost got finished in the first 3 minutes, which I think a lot of people were thinking, why is Yair Rodriguez not putting his foot on the gas tank and just throwing heavy shots and dropping Brian Ortega, or at least clinch up with him, throw the elbows, get out, and then jump back into it to make it seem like Brian Ortega is more hurt than he actually is. In the first 3 minutes, Yair just unloaded on Brian Ortega, beat him up, clearly won the first round. Then going into the second round, Brian Ortega just altered his game plan. He went in for the clinch. He threw some significant strikes, really just get a hold of Yair Rodriguez. He threatened him with a couple of submissions, but couldn't really get anything going in that second round. Landed some good elbows. In the second round, going into the third round, Yair Rodriguez had a cut under his eye, which, wasn't terrible, but it definitely seemed like if Brian Ortega landed more elbows in that area, the cut was going to get a lot worse and it would impair Yair Rodriguez's eye. Going into that third round, Yair Rodriguez just seemed off. It just seemed like after the first 3 minutes of that first round, Yair Rodriguez was just not there. It kind of seemed like he couldn't really, either it was his cardio because of the elevation in Mexico City, or maybe he hurt something in his arm or in his elbow, but he did not throw as much after the first 3 minutes in the first round, which was a little surprising because Brian Ortega's striking is not that good. You could definitely tell the striking difference between Brian Ortega and Yair Rodriguez. Brian Ortega has pretty good boxing, but overall he doesn't really throw many kicks. He doesn't really have that good long range point fighting. He's kind of just like that inside boxer who is just brawling it out. Brian Ortega eats a lot of punches just to throw a couple, So it seemed like Yair Rodriguez could have won that fight. But, Yair Rodriguez in the second and third round just got put on his back. Couldn't really do nothing. In the third round, Brian Ortega took down Yair Rodriguez and then got him in the arm triangle, which was a beautiful choke. He held it on a little long, and Mark Goddard finally got Brian Ortega off of Yair Rodriguez, but it was a good fight. I would like to see Brian Ortega fight Ilyanek or have him rematch with Volkanovski, and the winner of Brian Ortega and Alexander Volkanovski fights Ilia Topuria. Let Ilia Topuria do his Spain run, show off that belt, show off the new featherweight champion, and then while he's doing that, we do Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega 2, and the winner of that fight Ilia Topuria. I like that. You could just give Brian Ortega straight to Ilia Topuria because there's not really a number one contender right now. I don't want to see a rematch with Alexander Volkanovski and Ilia Topuria right now. Brian Ortega, his last win before this was the Korean Zombie, which was, I think, back in 2020. So Brian Ortega isn't really deserving of a title shot right now. But with him beating Yair Rodriguez, and there's not really anybody in the featherweight division at the top of the line right now, you can give it to him, which, we probably shouldn't, but I think Brian Ortega and Alexander Volkanovski, a rematch, a second fight between the two. Winner of that fights Ilia Topuria, and I like that matchup. Overall, UFC Mexico City was a pretty good card. I enjoyed the main event. I really enjoyed that co-main event. I thought Brian Ortega showed a lot of adversity. He fought through some tough strikes and really proved, why he is such a great grappling specialist, why you have to watch out for his ground game because he is sneaky and he'll catch you in a choke and, he'll finish a fight in any round. You got to be careful. Other than that, this is the breakdown, the review of UFC Mexico City. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. See you in the next video.